Every week, it's our goal to share financial information that helps you in both your life and financial vineyard. We hope it takes you from your roots to the journey of your vines and the influences in the air that help craft your delicious life. Like wine, life and finances have different palates that should be celebrated and not judged. Welcome to this edition of Wine and Dime with Amy Irvine and Becky Eason. Today, we are going to continue our series in talking about love and emotions and money, and particularly around parents. Yes, I know that's an exciting topic to be listening to, but if you are somebody that is either helping a parent or a grandparent around this particular topic, and the freedom or loss of freedom that sometimes come when they can't handle their finances, that's an extremely emotional topic around money. But before we get started, of course, we have to talk about what kind of wine we might drink, because this is a Friday that we are actually recording. We like to record on Fridays. And it seems like every single week I say this, like TGIF, I've got my wine sitting out on the counter tonight, ready to go. Tonight, I'm actually going to be drinking a Cab Franc from Lakewood. And I know, Becky, last time you and I recorded, you actually mentioned that your favorite wine was from Lakewood and Abbey Rose. Is that still your favorite at this time?
It is, except I'll have to try the Cab Franc.
It's very smooth. Yeah, I think we had talked about Abbey Rose being a nice intro wine, I call it, kind of in the middle of the road. Their Cab Franc has some pepperiness to it, but it's extremely smooth. So yeah, they do carry it at that small little liquor store that's right there in Hornell by Wegmans. So if you want to go try a bottle of it, I would highly encourage it. But I'm prejudiced too. So digging into the topic of love and money and emotion and money, I know that as part of, and Kate and I talked about this in last week's podcast, but I know that you also attended the women's conference. And one of the things that we did was we talked about money habitudes and how different people spend money, or the emotion behind them spending their money. And everybody at the conference actually spent a little bit of time at the conference actually doing the habitude cards. But then I know some people took the cards home and actually explored it with their spouses or went a little bit deeper with those cards. And you mentioned that you actually did kind of learn some things about yourself around money. And I think you're acutely aware of yourself. So it was interesting to hear what you learned. What were some of the lessons that you took away from doing that exercise?
I think a big lesson was doing it with my husband and seeing we knew we weren't exactly on the same page with spending versus saving, giving, but to have those cards really verify that, and then have the conversation around, well, what does this mean? And, how can we, support each other going forward while still fulfilling our wishes?
You mentioned the word communication and conversation, and you're fairly early on in your marriage still. And you had this conversation about how can we support, and you also used the word support. When couples are having significant financial challenges or conflicts and don't sit down and actually learn the whys behind it, there's a lot of assumptions made. You're spending money that we don't have, or you're spending money we should be doing this with, or you're, and it's in our heads to a certain extent, and it's not verbalized, or if it is, it's not verbalized in a healthy manner. How did you guys take that next step to say, this is good information? What are we going to do with it? Was it a budget discussion, or what did you do to kind of take it that next step?
Yeah. So we have each of us have our own personal account, and then we have our joint account. So we kind of looked at it, and I knew he wanted to buy fun things and I'm more of a giver, but we've always done that out of our personal accounts. So it has never really impacted us jointly, but we kind of talked about are we each saving enough for our own personal spending? And, in our case, it turned out we were. So we didn't really have to make any changes, but we're both aware of each other's goals and how we want to spend money.
That's great. I always say that, how they have pre-Cana classes for those that are in the Catholic religion around, one of the classes is actually around money. I just think the condition for your marriage license should be a class around money.
Yeah. I mean, it's very emotional, and you're not only going through the emotions of getting married and starting a whole new life together, but to add finances into there. is very stressful.
And you and Colin were raised a little bit differently, right? I mean, you were raised in a household where it was an entrepreneur household, and, there were ups and downs and cycles. And, you understand from my perspective, your parents were pretty upfront with you about the finances going around. And so you're more aware of money, I would say, than most people. That's my perception. So as you got older too, your parents started to take on taking care of your grandparents, and you witnessed their declining physical and mental capacity issues, and watching your parents start to have to take on responsibility of financial caregiving, not just physical caregiving. Let's talk a little bit about what you saw as your parents needed to take that on. What was the reaction that your grandparents had when they started to have somebody else have to take care of that?
Yeah, my grandpa, I think he knew deep down that he wasn't fully able to take care of it. And so at the time I was in college, and, he knew what I was taking, being financial planning. So he asked if I would help him. Mm-hmm. And so I started trying to help him a little bit, and that kind of eased the transition, because then it became very apparent that he couldn't handle it on his own. So then my dad took over, having that stronger relationship, more power to really step in and help. Mm-hmm. And so I think for my grandpa, it was a really good transition. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now my grandmother, she was very close with my aunt in helping. Mm-hmm. So I watched my aunt take on more of like the bill paying and going to different meetings with the bank and, different institutions. Mm-hmm. And so she kind of stepped in and built that relationship to help that transition as well.
Yeah.
Both of them were very emotional, because no one wants to give up their freedom.
Mm-hmm. I think the two most difficult things that somebody gives up as they age is driving and the financial caregiving of themselves. Like those two things they're big emotional hurdles, right? When you can't drive anymore, you've lost some independence. When you can't pay your bills confidently, you've lost another level of confidence. And we saw with Brent's mom, first it was like she just handed over the checkbook and said, you take care of it. It was just her, she didn't want to do it anymore kind of type thing. And then she lost her driving. And it was after that we saw that it's almost like she gave up at that point in time. There's that psychology of loss of independence. And when you feel very, you feel like you've given up all your normal activities, that can drive some of the other, like hygiene decisions and those kinds of things, in a different direction. And sometimes it's a smooth transition, like what you've talked about. Other times, not so much. It's definitely, I can do this. I can still do this. And it's because they don't want to give up that independence. Yeah. Now, one of the tips that I think people can take away is that it's if you start to recognize certain things, not being too overbearing, right? Sort of gently introducing some assistance, like having that conversation that's not like, you can't do this anymore. I have to do it. It's a gentle introduction. I mean, it's great that your grandpa came to you and said, hey, Becky, you're taking these classes that are around finance. Do you want to help me out? But it's recognizing those signs sometimes that's a bit of a challenge. And it sounds like your grandfather had a good transition into that. And even your grandma with your aunt had a decent transition into that environment. Did you notice any, once they made the decision, did you notice any emotional changes in them around like expending it all?
So with my grandpa, it actually happened right around the time that COVID hit. Oh. So it wasn't, very noticeable because he stayed home a lot and he didn't really have the opportunity to go out and spend. But what we did notice is that a lot of charities were sending him mail and he wanted to donate to every charity. We'd be like, Grandpa, he just wrote a check to this charity. And he's like, oh, I did? I'm like, yep, you made a donation. So why don't we wait a little while and then you can make another donation later on. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes it'd be the same conversation each time we went over to see him.
Mm-hmm. Did your dad have power of attorney or was he joint on the accounts? How did you guys set that up?
My dad had been joint on the account for a long time, which was very beneficial. So even though my grandpa didn't necessarily know, my dad was able to kind of monitor the transactions. He did it in a way that, unless something huge came out of the account, which it fortunately didn't, but he would have been able to kind of put a stop to it.
Yeah, because a couple ways that you can do that is be joint on the account like your dad was, or you can, if a family member has planned with a power of attorney, then you can actually go to the bank and deliver your power of attorney and be able to, basically act as the person, writing the check and kind of monitor things a little bit closer. As you think about, I'm just curious too, as you think about the whole like money habitude side of things, would you say that your grandparents, like, because you were saying your grandpa wanted to give to every charity that he, got a notice for, was he the type of person that really prior to that was a giving, person? Was he an overgiver, I guess is what I'm asking, or was it more controlled?
From everything I could see, it was a controlled giver.
So he wasn't changing a habit necessarily. He just was probably giving more because he kept giving notices.
Yep, exactly that.
And thinking about like your, if you could give tips to people that are listening, and thinking about planning for some financial caregiving of parents or grandparents, what would be just a couple of tips that you might offer that would maybe get them just moving in that direction a little bit?
Like moving in the direction of the parent or grandparent asking for help.
Yeah. Or just recognizing that they might need help. Are there some signs that we should be looking for? And then what are some ways that we might be able to, if it was me recognizing something going on with my parents, what would those signs be? And what are some ways that I might be able to gently start to get involved without them feeling like I'm trying to take over? Because that's really where the resistance comes.
Yeah. A big sign was overwhelmed. Like if an insurance bill came in or something and, sometimes you get multiple pieces of mail, like before you get your actual premium notice and, those pile up and then you go over a visit and there's a pile of mail and they don't know what to do with it. Now my grandpa, he was an insurance agent his entire life. And so like, to me, that was like, okay, something's a little bit off. Because, he's known this his entire life. So what's going on?
Especially in an area that he knew, that's a great sign, but feeling overwhelmed in general with mail. And I would agree. Like that was Eva's problem too. Like she would get 3 or 4 pieces in the mail and she would feel like I got to get this bill paid tomorrow. And sometimes it wasn't a bill, like you said. It's just, And the medical statements, oh my gosh, how like you get the explanation of benefits and then you'd get the, notice of like what was paid by Medicare, but then what's still pending with the supplementary insurance and then what the supplementary insurance covered. And then you finally get the bill like 2.5 to 3 months later from the hospital of any portion that you belong to. For her, that was very overwhelming. We did notice that. And any other like signs that you can think of that you guys noticed?
Another one was ATM withdrawals. My grandpa would swing by the ATM almost every time he was out and about. And, right until the end, he was like, I gotta go to the ATM, get some cash out. We're like, okay, you're not going anywhere. What do you need cash for?
That's really interesting, Becky. And I say that because I didn't recognize that as a sign. Now that you're saying it, I guess I do, but I didn't recognize that as a sign with Eva necessarily. She didn't go to the ATM, but she would drive down to the bank and get cash out once or twice a week for a little while. So it's almost the same thing that you're saying. So that's interesting that both your grandfather and my mother-in-law there's some commonality there on that front. We didn't necessarily always know what she was spending the money on. To be honest with you, we anticipate that when we get around to cleaning her house out, we're probably going to find some money stashed in different places because we have no idea what she was spending the money on. Other than maybe gas. I don't know, but that's interesting. I never put that together. So it's interesting that you bring that up. Do you know what they were like? Do you have any idea what your grandfather was spending any particular money on, or he just felt the need to have cash?
I think it was the need to have cash and going back to being very giving. Yeah. Every time we would go somewhere, he'd be like, well, can I buy this for you? Or let me pay your entrance into here. And I think it was his like security and also giving.
Oh, he was such a cute guy too, I have to admit.
Yes, he was.
And you mentioned that he kind of approached you, but what if any suggestions on if somebody, recognizes these kinds of behaviors and haven't been approached? Is there maybe one tip that you would suggest that is a gentle entry into assisting?
Yeah, maybe offer to go to, if you notice that it's insurance statements piling up, maybe offer to go to the insurance agency with your parent or grandparent and, approach it as you're trying to help them and, they can still make the decisions for now at least, but you want to be there for them, or you want to go to the bank and, if you're not joint on the account, maybe say, as that first step, why don't we become joint account holders? It's still your account, but, just as a backup, kind of easing into it.
There's only one situation that I can think of where it was, that's what they offered to do was like, hey mom, that's not in my situation, like a client. Hey mom, why don't we start helping you out a little bit? Like I'll go to the bank with you and, we can put my name on it jointly. Oh, you're trying to steal my money. That to me was a sign.
Yeah.
Like when that paranoia kind of kicks in, that's a sign of like, ooh, like that never would have been the case before, right? Like somebody would have never assumed that you were going to steal your parents' money. That to me was that paranoia aspect of things was kind of a little bit of a sign. And that's where I think sometimes a power of attorney can be very helpful versus, if somebody's feeling like, they don't want to be put on the account, then power of attorney might kick in to be able to, like you said, monitor, like your dad monitored things a little bit before it was a necessity that he actually got actively involved. So from an estate planning perspective, you want to make sure those documents are in place well in advance so that if something like that pops up, we can properly manage the situation. So when we talk to people about estate planning, and I have actually had people say to me, what do I care? I'm going to be dead. Why do I have to go get a will or power of attorney or healthcare proxy? Those are things that, especially the will, like, what do I care? This is where do you want your family to have to go through like getting appointed as administrator and having to figure out how you want your assets to be distributed? Or would you like to assist them so that they're not as stressed out after they've just lost you? Or you don't know if you're going to need a power of attorney at some point in time because, something could happen and it could be temporary in nature, but you really need to, have those situations in place where you have the ability to make some financial decisions. And this is not true just of like aging parents. This is true of everybody really, because you could be, young and have a health situation that's going to need somebody to step in and take care of things. So when we think about things that we can do in the month of February to show our loved ones how much we care for them, if you don't currently have your healthcare proxy, power of attorney, and a will, go do that. Go take care of that. Show them how much you love them with that action. And I know people are probably rolling their eyes at me right now. But in reality, I think that's a great gift that we can take some stress off from our loved ones by doing those kinds of things. Any other recommendations or tips, Becky, that you would give to anybody thinking about, helping their parents or their grandparents around financial decisions?
I'm going to echo what you said about getting those estate planning documents in line.
Yeah.
Because it's, even if you're not necessarily thinking about it, it's still in the back of your mind of, has everything been taken care of? Because life is so unpredictable and you just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you don't know where to go, give us a call. We'll give you some referrals from attorneys that are in your area. Because we know we have listeners all over the country. You do need to have an attorney in your state or licensed in your state. So we'd be happy to refer you to somebody that we would recommend for those documents. I don't like the idea of doing like the LegalZoom kind of edition of these kinds of documents. I do recommend that you make the investment of working with an estate planning or elder law attorney. I think sometimes mistakes can be made when we don't do that kind of stuff. So we'd be thrilled to give a recommendation. And we so appreciate y'all listening this month and our continued theme of emotion and love and money and the connection between those three adjectives. And I do call money an adjective. So we'd love for you to share this with your friends through LinkedIn, through Instagram, through Twitter, and through Facebook. We also would love if you want to send us a question around this particular topic. We'd certainly throw it in our Asking for a Friend section of our newsletter. So please feel free to ask away. And if not this month, we'll have it in a future edition. We hope you very much have enjoyed this series and this particular episode. And like I said, please feel free to share.
And that will about do it for today's episode of Wine and Dine. You can contact Amy through the website, www.rootedpg.com or amy@rootedpg.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at rootedpg for the latest news. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like to hear about, feel free to let us know. And don't forget to rate and subscribe the show wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in next time.